In 1071, the Roman Empire marched east with its most powerful army, 40,000 elite soldiers led by an emperor. But on the plains of Manzikert, they faced just 20,000 Turks. And what happened next destroyed 1,000 years of Roman power. The banners of Byzantium still glittered in the sun, though the light had begun to fade. From the towers of Constantinople, the imperial eagle still spread its double-headed wings across half the world. But beneath the gold and silk, cracks had begun to form, cracks that no glory could hide. It was the year 1071. The Roman Empire, though its citizens still called it that, was a shadow of the greatness it once claimed. Enemies pressed from every side, and the east trembled under the rising power of a new force, the Seljuk Turks. They came from the steppes like storms, swift and silent, their horses ghosts in the dust. Their leader, Sultan Alp Arslan, the heroic lion, was young, brilliant, and ruthless. He had united the tribes of the east beneath the crescent banner and now set his eyes on Anatolia, the beating heart of Byzantium's frontier. In Constantinople, Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes prepared for war. He was a soldier, not a schemer, tall, stern, and proud, born of the old aristocracy. He had taken the throne through marriage and ambition, and he knew the nobles of the capital despised him for it. But he cared little for politics. He wanted only one thing: to restore the empire's honor. "Too long," he told his generals, "have these nomads trampled our land. I will show them the might of Rome, and I will crush them beneath my banner." He gathered the greatest army Byzantium had seen in a century, more than 100,000 men. Cataphracts in gleaming armor, Varangian guards from the north, mercenaries from the Balkans, Armenians, Georgians, and Franks. The empire marched east like a thunderstorm, a tide of steel and gold moving toward destiny. But destiny has no loyalty. Far to the east, in the plains near Lake Van, Alp Arslan received word of the emperor's advance. His advisors urged him to retreat, but the sultan only smiled. "Let him come," he said. "He brings his empire with him. I will bury them both in the dust of Manzikert." The eagle and the crescent were set on a collision course, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the ancient gods of war stirred, ready to decide which empire would live and which would become legend. The Roman host stretched for miles, a moving city of iron and silk crawling across the Anatolian plains. Banners rippled in the hot wind, golden eagles gleaming beneath the sun. The sound of armor, hooves, and marching feet was like thunder rolling endlessly toward the east. At its head rode Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes. His armor shone like a mirror, his purple cloak snapping behind him. He believed this march would restore the empire's glory, that the name Rome would once again command fear from the Nile to the Caucasus. Yet behind him, whispers followed like shadows. Among his generals was Andronikos Doukas, proud, cunning, and treacherous. His family despised Romanos, seeing him as an upstart soldier who had stolen their power. He obeyed orders, but his loyalty was poison. Every word he spoke dripped with hidden contempt. "My emperor," he said one night as the army camped near Theodosiopolis, "our strength is unmatched. Even the Persians of old would tremble before such might. Perhaps you need not march so far to prove your power." Romanos looked at him sharply. "I did not come to prove it. I came to use it. The Turks raid our lands like wolves. I will drive them back to their deserts." The army pushed onward, Varangian guards from the north, their axes glittering, Norman mercenaries restless for gold, Armenians and Georgians bound by uneasy alliance. Discipline faltered. The ranks were swollen with men who fought not for Rome, but for coin. Scouts reported the Turks moving lightly across the hills, never attacking, always watching. "They vanish like smoke," said one commander. "You chase them, and the desert swallows you." Still, Romanos pressed east. The nobles muttered that he was reckless. The soldiers whispered that the Turks were demons. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Alp Arslan's riders watched every step, mapping the emperor's pride. On the 15th day, the first omen appeared. A dust storm swept through the camp, tearing banners, scattering tents. The men cursed as their supplies vanished into the wind. When it cleared, a handful of scouts did not return. At sunset, one rider stumbled back into camp, his armor dented, his horse foaming. His face was pale as death. "They're waiting," he gasped. "Thousands of them, watching, smiling." Romanos said nothing. He turned his gaze eastward, toward the darkening hills of Manzikert. "Then we will meet them," he said quietly, "and end this." He did not know that the hills ahead would devour his army whole. At dawn, the fog lifted over the plains of Manzikert, revealing a world of shimmering heat and distant mirages. Beyond the low hills, the tents of the Seljuk host glittered faintly in the rising sun, a mirage that breathed. Emperor Romanos IV stood before his officers, the imperial banner snapping in the wind. "The Sultan is near," he declared. "We take Manzikert today and force him to his knees tomorrow." His voice carried strength, but beneath it lingered unease. For days, the Turks had appeared like ghosts. A handful of horsemen glimpsed at dawn, a flight of arrows from unseen hands, a caravan burned to ash in the night. Their strategy was clear: harass, vanish, draw the Romans deeper. But the Romans were too proud to see it. As the sun climbed higher, Romanos divided his forces. One half, under General Joseph Tarchoniotes, was ordered to seize a nearby fortress. The other half, under his personal command, advanced toward Manzikert. It was a fatal mistake. The city's gates fell easily. The defenders fled before the might of the empire. Romanos raised the imperial standard over the walls and gave thanks to God. But when his scouts returned, their faces were pale. "My lord," one stammered, "the Turks are no longer retreating. They surround us." From the hills came a sound like the hiss of wind, the whisper of 1,000 arrows. Then the sky darkened. The first volley struck the Roman line like a rainstorm of death. Horses reared, men screamed, shields splintered. The Turks appeared from the dust in perfect silence. Swift horse archers circling the army, loosing shafts as they rode, never close enough to be caught. "Hold the line!" Romanos roared, riding along the ranks. His cataphracts formed a wall of steel, their lances braced. But every charge struck only empty air. The Turks melted away, only to reappear from another flank, another angle, another storm. All day the dance continued, the Turks striking and vanishing, the Romans bleeding and raging. The desert drank the sweat of men and horses, and the sun turned red as if the sky itself wept. At dusk, the Turks vanished once more, leaving the battlefield littered with arrows and corpses. Romanos looked to the horizon, where a faint crescent moon hung over the hills. "Tomorrow," he muttered, "we end this ghost war." But in the hills, Sultan Alp Arslan smiled. "Tomorrow," he whispered to his emirs, "Rome will learn to fear the desert." Night cloaked the plains of Manzikert in silence. The campfires of the Roman army flickered like dying stars, while beyond the hills the Seljuk host lay invisible, its torches hidden, its horses restless. In the heart of his camp, Sultan Alp Arslan prayed. His armor was plain, his robe white, not the gold and jewels of kings, but the garb of a warrior ready to die. When he rose from the ground, his men saw that he had bound his bowstring with his own turban. "If I am taken alive," he said quietly, "then I deserve neither throne nor mercy." Around him knelt his emirs, grim and silent. They knew the odds: 20,000 Turks against a Roman army 5 times their number. But the Sultan's faith burned like the desert sun. "Tomorrow," he continued, "we fight not for conquest, but for the faith. If I fall, tell my sons that their father died facing Rome itself." Across the plain, Emperor Romanos IV could not sleep. In his tent, maps lay scattered across the table, ink smudged by his restless hands. He had taken the city of Manzikert, but now his scouts were gone, his supplies dwindling, and the Turks had vanished like smoke. "Why do they not face us?" he demanded of his officers. "Where are they?" No one answered. The nobles avoided his gaze. The mercenaries sharpened their blades in silence. Only one voice broke the stillness, Andronikos Doukas, his supposed ally. "Perhaps, my emperor, they fear you, or perhaps they wait for us to exhaust ourselves chasing shadows." Romanos glared at him. "Then let us give them battle and end these games." The next morning, the army formed ranks and began its march toward the distant ridge where the Turks had last been seen. The sun burned white. The heat shimmered like water. At first, the way seemed clear. No movement, no enemy. Only the whisper of wind across the sand. Then a single horn sounded. From every hilltop, the Seljuks appeared. Tens of thousands of horsemen sweeping down like a living storm. Their arrows filled the sky. Trumpets blared through the Roman lines. Shields rose, men shouted, horses screamed. From the center of the Seljuk host, Alp Arslan raised his sword and cried, "Today I fight for Islam. Let no man retreat." His white robe gleamed as he charged into the sun. And for the first time in centuries, the army of Rome trembled. The plains of Manzikert erupted in chaos. Dust rose so thick it blotted out the sky, and through it came the thunder of hooves. Tens of thousands of Seljuk riders circling, firing, vanishing. The air sang with arrows. The earth shook with fear. Emperor Romanos IV rode at the center of his vast army, his imperial banner gleaming in the haze. His guards surrounded him in a living wall of steel, but even they could not shield him from the truth. His army was unraveling. The Turks moved like water, flowing, bending, never breaking. Each time the Romans advanced, the crescent-shaped line of horsemen curved and widened, drawing them deeper into the open plain. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere, always just out of reach. "Press forward," Romanos shouted, his sword raised. "They are breaking," but they were not breaking. They were inviting. The cataphracts, heavy and magnificent, charged again and again, but each charge struck only dust. The Seljuks melted away, loosing arrows into their flanks as they turned. The battlefield became a ring of death, the empire's finest warriors bleeding beneath an unseen noose. By midday, the sun hung white and merciless above the field. Men dropped from exhaustion, horses foamed at the mouth. The once mighty formations of Byzantium were now scattered patches of chaos. And then came the whisper, the most dangerous sound of all. "They flee. The Turks are retreating." From the rear ranks, banners wavered. The sight of the Seljuks withdrawing, their riders turning as if in flight, ignited the greed and pride of commanders hungry for victory. "The enemy runs!" cried Andronikos Doukas, his eyes gleaming. "The day is ours." He gave the order. The Roman lines surged forward in pursuit, shouting triumphantly, unaware that they were riding into the jaws of death. From the hills, Alp Arslan watched in silence. When the moment came, he raised his hand. "Now," he whispered. The retreating Turks wheeled around as one, their crescent closing like a blade. Trumpets shrieked. The sky turned black with arrows. Within minutes, the Roman advance was trapped, encircled by a sea of horsemen. Confusion turned to terror. Trumpets blared orders no one could hear. Romanos realized the truth too late. His army was not chasing victory. It was already surrounded by it. And somewhere behind him, Doukas turned his troops away, his banners falling back from the field. The betrayal had begun. The invincible army of Rome was bleeding from within, and the Sultan's snare was closing tight. The sun bled red above Manzikert. The dust hung thick, turning day to twilight. In every direction the Turks moved like a tide, their horses weaving between the broken ranks of the Byzantine army. What had begun as a proud march of banners was now a storm of screaming, blood, and smoke. Emperor Romanos IV tried to rally his men. "Form up, to me, sons of Rome," he cried, his voice hoarse. Around him, the Varangian Guard, hulking warriors from the frozen north, fought in grim silence, their axes carving space amid the chaos. But there were too few, and the rest of the army was already lost. From the rear, the emperor looked for Andronikos Doukas, whose division was meant to guard the retreat. But Doukas's banners were fading into the distance. He had withdrawn his men, not to aid his emperor, but to destroy him. Traitor! Romanos spat, realization sinking like poison. The Seljuks pressed in from all sides, arrows raining down in endless arcs. Men fell in heaps, pierced through armor and bone. The imperial standard, the golden double-headed eagle, toppled into the dirt. Then, through the smoke, came the white banner of Alp Arslan. The Sultan rode at the head of his riders, his robe still white, untouched by dust or blood. His bow bent like a serpent in his hands, and his eyes burned with calm, merciless purpose. "Do not let him escape," he said to his guard. "The Lion of Rome must bow to the Lion of the East." By nightfall, the Byzantine army was no more. Thousands lay dead. Thousands more fled into the desert, hunted down by Seljuk archers who shot them as they ran. Romanos's horse was struck by an arrow. He fell hard, rolling in the dust. A dozen Turks leapt upon him, blades drawn, until one voice stopped them. "Alive!" Alp Arslan commanded. The emperor was dragged before the Sultan's tent. His armor was shattered, his cloak torn, his crown lost in the dirt. He knelt, bound, before the man he had sworn to destroy. Alp Arslan looked down at him in silence. Then, in a voice quiet enough to chill the blood, he asked, "What would you do, Emperor, if you had captured me?" Romanos raised his battered head. "I would have killed you." The Sultan smiled faintly. "Then you are more cruel than I." He helped the broken emperor to his feet, brushed the dust from his shoulders, and said, "Do not fear. I am not a destroyer of kings. I am the judge of pride." And for the first time in 1,000 years, a Roman emperor bowed before the East. The night wind swept across the plain of Manzikert, carrying with it the scent of smoke and the cries of the dying. Beneath a canopy of stars, two figures sat facing each other in a tent lit by flickering lamps. One bound and weary, the other calm and unbowed. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes sat in chains, his armor stripped, his face bruised and dusted with the blood of his own men. Across from him, Sultan Alp Arslan sat cross-legged upon a carpet, his bow resting beside him, his white robe now streaked faintly with red. For a long time neither spoke. Only the rustle of the tent and the distant murmur of the camp broke the silence. Finally, Alp Arslan spoke. "Tell me, Emperor of Rome," he said softly, "what brought you here, pride or faith?" Romanos's eyes were hollow, yet still defiant. "Duty," he said. "I came to defend what remains of my empire. The Turks burned our lands, took our cities. Would you have me do nothing?" The Sultan nodded slowly. "And yet, in defending it, you have lost it." He poured wine into 2 cups, one for himself, one for his prisoner. The emperor hesitated, then drank. The taste of defeat was bitter, but oddly pure. "You fought well," Alp Arslan said after a pause. "Better than I expected. For a moment, I thought God had turned his face from me." Romanos gave a faint, broken smile. "Perhaps he only wished to show you mercy." The Sultan laughed. Not mockery, but genuine amusement. "Mercy? You speak of mercy, Roman Emperor, yet your generals abandoned you on the field. Your own kind betrayed you before the enemy did." Romanos's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The truth was too sharp to deny. Alp Arslan leaned forward. "You called yourself Rome's avenger, yet you were devoured not by the sword, but by pride. Remember this, it is not I who destroyed your army. It was Rome itself." Silence again. The 2 men regarded each other, conqueror and conquered, both aware that history had shifted between them. At last, the Sultan rose. "You are not my prisoner," he said. "You are my guest. You will be ransomed to your people, and you will tell them this: the days of Rome's dominion are over. The East now belongs to the sons of the steppe." Romanos bowed his head, not in submission, but in exhausted understanding. "Then the world has changed," he whispered. Alp Arslan smiled faintly. "No, Emperor. The world has only remembered who it belongs to." Outside, the desert wind howled, sweeping over the corpses of a fallen empire. Days passed, and the plains of Manzikert were left to the crows. The once mighty army of the Romans, the so-called invincible host, lay silent beneath the burning sun. Sultan Alp Arslan kept his word. After several days of negotiation, he released Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, granting him safe passage home in exchange for peace and ransom. It was a gesture both magnanimous and devastating, for mercy can wound deeper than the sword. Under guard, the emperor rode west through a land that no longer seemed his. Towns once loyal to Constantinople now flew the banners of the Seljuks. Fortresses that had sworn to defend the empire now lay in ruins or surrendered without resistance. The roads were empty, the villages silent. The east had been broken. As he crossed the Euphrates, Romanos paused on the riverbank. The sun sank low, staining the waters red. He thought of his army, of the Varangians who had fought to the last, of the mercenaries who had fled, of the nobles who had betrayed him. He thought of the Doukas family, and rage burned in him like a fever. "They have destroyed me," he murmured. "They have destroyed Rome itself." But vengeance was beyond him now. When he reached the imperial frontier, he learned the final cruelty. Andronikos Doukas had declared him dead and seized the throne in the name of his father, Michael VII. The emperor's throne was gone, his empire gone, his name cursed. Romanos, once master of the East, was now a fugitive. He fled into the mountains of Cilicia, gathering a few loyal soldiers, but his pursuers were close. Betrayal followed him to the end. Captured by the men of Doukas, he was dragged in chains to Constantinople. There they blinded him slowly, brutally, in the name of the empire he had fought to save. As the hot irons touched his eyes, he did not cry out. Only one word left his lips, whispered through pain and memory. Manzikert. The light of Rome went out with him. The empire would linger for centuries yet, but it would never rise again. The East, Anatolia, the empire's heart, was gone forever, swallowed by the Turks. And somewhere in the deserts beyond, Sultan Alp Arslan looked west and said quietly, "The lion has slain the eagle." Constantinople rejoiced when the blinded emperor was paraded through its streets. Bells rang, and nobles in silk whispered venom behind their jeweled hands. The Doukas family had reclaimed the throne, the schemers triumphant, the soldier king broken. Romanos IV Diogenes, once the pride of the empire, now stumbled barefoot through the dust, his eyes bandaged, his body trembling from pain and fever. Children threw stones. Priests muttered blessings that sounded like mockery. In the Blachurni palace, Michael VII Doukas received him with false piety. "You have caused enough ruin, Romanos," he said coldly. "Your war brought shame to the empire." Romanos laughed, a hoarse, pitiful sound. "My war," he rasped. "It was your treachery that bled us dry. I fought for Rome. You sold her for comfort." The courtiers gasped, but Michael only turned away. "Take him to the monastery. Let him pray for his sins." They dragged him through marble halls he had once ruled, down to a cart that bore him into exile. In a small monastery near Cappadocia, the emperor who had faced the might of the East spent his final days in silence. His body withered, his wounds festered, but his mind burned as bright as ever. He dictated letters to the few monks who pitied him, letters not of revenge, but of warning. "Tell my sons," he whispered, "that Rome has no enemies greater than her own pride. The sword that pierced us at Manzikert was forged in Constantinople." Far away, word reached Sultan Alp Arslan of the emperor's fate. The sultan grew quiet, his eyes clouded. "Blinded," he said. "Then Rome has blinded itself. No empire that devours its own kings can stand." In the years that followed, Turkish settlers poured into Anatolia. Cities like Caesarea, Iconium, and Sebastia fell without resistance. Byzantine garrisons surrendered or vanished into the hills. The heart of the empire, its farms, its soldiers, its lifeblood was gone. The once mighty road from Constantinople to Antioch, the spine of Rome, now belonged to the Seljuks. In the monastery garden, the last true emperor of the East sat beneath a fig tree, his sight long gone, his voice a whisper. He murmured one final prayer: "Lord, Let Rome remember who she was, before the dust takes her name. When the monks found him the next morning, his hands were folded over a small wooden cross. The man was dead, the empire was dying, and the crescent moon rose over Anatolia alone. Years passed. The winds that swept across the Anatolian plains carried new songs, songs not of Rome, but of the Turks. The land that had once fed the legions of emperors now belonged to men who rode from the east, their horses grazing where Roman cataphracts had fallen. In the deserts beyond the Euphrates, Sultan Alp Arslan prepared for new campaigns. His empire grew vast, his name feared from Syria to the Caspian. Yet when courtiers praised him as the lion who devoured Rome, he only shook his head. Rome devoured itself, he said quietly. I merely gave it a grave. And so it was. After Manzikert, the Byzantine Empire would never again be whole. The provinces of Anatolia, its heart, its strength, slipped away one by one until only the coast and the shadow of the old capital remained. In Constantinople, emperors came and went like seasons, each weaker than the last. Civil wars bled the empire dry. The great houses feasted on its corpse. The golden eagles still flew, but their wings were broken. And yet, in distant monasteries, monks wrote by candlelight, preserving the memory of what had been. They told of Romanos IV Diogenes, the soldier king who rode east to reclaim the empire's honor and found instead its doom. Some called him a fool, others a martyr. They wrote of that final day on the plains of Manzikert, the sun burning red, the desert trembling beneath 20,000 horsemen, the roar of arrows in the air, and the silence that followed, the sound of an empire ending. Centuries later, travelers crossing those same plains would find shards of armor buried in the sand, and sometimes, when the wind howled, they claimed to hear faintly the clash of iron and the cry of dying men. A shepherd once found a rusted coin stamped with the face of a forgotten emperor. He held it to the light and whispered, "Rome." But Rome no longer answered. For on that August day in 1071, beneath the blazing sky of Manzikert, the eagle fell and the crescent rose, and history, merciless and eternal, turned its page.